I am very happy to welcome you to the second session of our international webinar series, Prescribed Burning Around the World, Purposes, Principles, Policies, and Practices. Prescribed fire is carried out in many different countries by many different people under many different circumstances, and there is a huge diversity in prescribed burning purposes, principles, policies, and practices that can serve to incentivize and inform fire use around the world. In this webinar series, we present a survey of prescribed fire from around the globe, and we're focused on 7 broad topic areas: fuel management, rangeland and landscape management, management of production forests, wildlife management, monitoring and data sets, ecological restoration, and cultural burning. Today's webinar, the second in our series, is entitled Preparing for the Big One, Prescribed Fire as a Strategic Fuel Reduction Tool. But before we begin, and I turn it over to Ruth, I'd like to express our thanks to our supporters and sponsors. Our webinar series is organized by the California Prescribed Fire Monitoring Program, which is the collaboration between the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection and the Safford Lab at the University of California, Davis. The program collects data and conducts analyses on the effectiveness and impacts of managed fire. And we'd specifically like to thank the California Fire Science Consortium and their funders, the U.S. Joint Fire Science Program and CAL FIRE, for help with advertisement, coordination, and registration, the University of California at Davis for IT help, and the Catalan Fire Service for help in securing some of our speakers. I also want to thank groups like the International Association for Wild and Fire who have helped to advertise the event. We also want to thank Joseph Serra, an artist in Catalonia, who's composed a piece of art for each of our webinars based on the webinar theme. It's very cool. You can see today's piece on the California Fire Consortium website. And then finally, I want to give sincere thanks to Ruth Domenech, the technical coordinator of the California Prescribed Fire Monitoring Program, who developed the idea for the international webinar and did most of the work to make it happen. Ruth will now introduce today's topic and our speakers. Thanks.
Thanks, Hugh. As you say, I'm Ruth Domenic, the technical coordinator for the California Prescribed Fire Monitoring Program, and along with Tara Orsel, a research assistant professor from the University of Nevada in Reno, we will moderate this session. Today's title is Preparing for the Big Ones, Prescribed Fire as a Strategic Fuel Reduction Tool. And wildfires are becoming bigger and more severe around the world, overwhelming firefighters' capacity to control them. Prescribed fires can be used to safely introduce natural fire ecology and forest ecology in the landscapes and regulate fire regimes. But is this approach working? Is fuel reduction goal dominating the prescribed fires? Are we forgetting the ecological role of fire, focusing on mega fires prevention? Or how do we balance the ecology of fire and the society needs? So all of these questions, and I am sure that lots more, are going to be answered with our speakers today. They will discuss on how fire and resource managers are using prescribed fire to prevent wildfire spread, the goals and tactics, the trade-offs between both landscape resilience and local fuel management, and whether prescribed fire intensity are enough to affect outcomes. As you say, today we have the artwork of Joseph Serra. I would like to share some information about this artwork created by him. He's an artist from Spain, and for each webinar, Joseph composed a piece of art based on the theme of the webinar. Joseph gained knowledge about the subject, maintaining close relationship with members of the Catalan Fire Service in Spain. This perspective have provided a technical foundation for his art, and the illustration created by Joseph for today's webinar reflects the basic elements of prescribed burns. It includes firefighters, fire torches, the hose, and the lines that are delimited in the burning plant beforehand. Additionally, Joseph wants to emphasize the smallness of a person in front of a controlled fire. Yeah, you can contact him into his mail if you are interested in his art. So before we begin, just some few technical issues to address. As you realize, the webinar is being recorded and will be able at the California Fire Science Consortium webpage approximately in a week after the webinar date. Today, each speaker will have 15 minutes, and then we will follow with 50 minutes for questions at the end. Unfortunately, today we have 3 speakers, as Jorge Saavedra is unable to join us due to an unexpected conflict. We apologize for that. We have a unique channel for questions. You can type your questions there, and at the end, we will choose a selection of them to ask to the speakers. Please include the name of the speaker you are addressing or indicate that is a question for all of them. And with all of that, I would like to introduce you to Marta Miralles. Marta has been a fire behavior analyst since 2001 and an incident commander since 2009. She applies research in the Catalan Fire Service and leads the fire ecology program in the Prescribed Fire program in Catalonia, Spain. She's a member of Forest Fire Experts for the European Civil Protection Mechanism, and she has been part of the international missions promoting fire analysis and fire ecology. The last one was last summer in Canada. So thanks, Marta. The floor is yours. You can start when you are ready.
Do you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay.
But you have to do the presentation mode.
Isn't it on? Uh-oh.
No.
Okay. Let me change the screen. Do you see it now?
No.
That's unexpected.
You are not yet sharing your screen.
We saw it before at the beginning. I'm sorry to interrupt.
But
Yes.
it wasn't the presentation mode though. That was her note slides. We need to see the presentation. She just needs to shift it. So there's a button to turn it from to invert it.
Does it work now?
You are not sharing your screen yet? In the Zoom controls? There we go.
Yeah. Yeah.
But when I do that, do you see the presentation mode?
Not yet.
Sorry, we thought we'd test everything. Let me do it another way. Now we see it?
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. What I wanted to focus on in this presentation from all that we do and have been doing is on where do we plan prescribed burning and how do we measure the performance and the success of these prescribed burnings based on this where. And I have to explain you first a bit about Catalonia, about our context. You have to understand 2 things about Catalonia fires. It's that one is that we have an uninterrupted fire culture since prehistory. In our rural areas, there are people who have always been managing fire, and even when the civilized world changed a lot of parameters, there remained a very rural population who still and have always managed fires and have always understood fires. So when you came with a professional perspectives based on accepted scientific knowledge, you found them in front of you, and in the fires they were where the opportunities will be, and we were as a fire service we were not there. The second thing that you have to understand is that I think we hardly have any of these prescribed fires and any fire, as a matter of fact, that is more than 1 kilometer from a house, and I'm being generous. So we have not only about 70% of Catalonia is a forested area, but it's a very densely populated area. So fires that spread at 7, at 10, at 12 kilometers an hour cross a lot of people and a lot of houses. So that's I thought you need the context to understand how do we understand fire. So one of the things that have been happening to us, as I told you, is that as our landscape grew with fuel, fire behavior became overwhelming. Think that maybe 90% of our landscape was agricultural land in the end of the 19th century, and it was abandoned, and now it's 70% is forested. So it's a big change. And with this big change came a large change in fire behavior. And fire behavior overwhelmed the suppression system and the prevention system. But also the same fires were not always behaving as a very large, intense fires, but suddenly they shifted and behaved like the photo in the bottom, and gave you opportunities. And when you looked at that, and in these opportunities, some of the locals in rural areas were already there because they already knew how the fire behaved in their landscape. Because the topography doesn't change, and the main winds that give you big fire scenario windows are always from the same directions, and that means that the interaction between topography and wind is fixed. And this is very easily seen in this image from fires in 1949, in 1970, in the 2000s, that the main changes where a fire, as you see, are following the main ridges, as the wind-driven fires tend to do. And the main changes is the ignition point. The red one has two large ridges available, so it follows two ridges. It's the red one. And the green one, the agricultural zone were abandoned, and then it has one more small ridge available to grow. So this gave us a perspective of how and why these people who having always lived in this country and in this and with these fires understood better than the fire service did where the opportunities would be. And you can put all the simulators and technology, and you don't have that kind of knowledge. And that kind of knowledge forced us to make a change of perspectives. So we looked in the world, and as a matter of fact, we learned a lot from California. We learned from the Campbell prediction system, which is a way of understanding fire mainly as not an static fire behavior, not an static as intensity and velocity, but as a flow in the landscape, and especially that you have to focus not on what the fire does, but on the changes on what the fire is doing, on why and how will the fire change. And that is what's important for you. Not everything, not to predict everything that the fire is doing, but to focus on the movement of this fire, on the flow of this fire. And that helped us understand a lot how with this uninterrupted fire culture, our locals from very rural areas understood where the fire will be, and where opportunities, where the fire will be weaker and then stronger, and that where the fire is first weaker and then stronger, you will have an opportunity. So we don't have to fight every flame. We don't have to focus on every intensity. We have to focus on these change points in the landscape. So based on that, we built this idea of understanding the flow of fire in a landscape. I think the easier way to understand it is the image in the bottom in the center. So the fire is following the ridge, but it's not following the ridge, following the big line in the top, but it's going slowly down. And as it got and it goes down, it goes up again with a big fire run. So if you start to try to stop the big line in the top of the ridge, you will not get anything. But if you stop the slower, greener light, a greener line, a greener movement, then you have the opportunity of closing more and more this type of fire behavior. You don't have to understand everything about that, but just that we have learned to look at fire as a flow in a landscape, and what's important is where it's weak, and that is where we have opportunities. That's what we have learned from that. So of course this has limits, both because technology has limits. So no fire simulators are very good to predict, especially rate of spread, but they don't understand how fire moves as a flanking fire. They are good with head fires. They are not good with flanking fires. And if you need to understand the flow of fire, you need to understand all of the parts of the fire. So we focused on history. This is an image of one of fire we had in 2012 in Girona, and where did we have opportunities? And we put that. This is an area with a high fire history. So we overlapped this information with information of the same of fires in the 80s and fires in the 90s on the same zone, some with north wind, some with northeast wind. And we saw that we had some opportunities that were always in the same places. We call that strategical management points, and those are these decision points, these change points, where the fire is weak, where we know we can have an opportunity, and then you can use fire simulators as a rate of spread, as a timing between these strategical management points. So that gave us a point of focus for operations, and that gave us a point of focus for prevention. So this is the first idea I wanted to give you, that we have learned to understand fire behavior as decision points. The image in the left, it's just a topographical fire. There's a small, very small agricultural area that totally breaks the fire, because even when the big flame length is upslope, the small movement in the bottom of the valley, it's the one that is allowing the fire to spread. So focusing on this weak point of the fire is what allowed the fire to stop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we lose you. Sorry. No, go ahead.
Okay. Okay. So we have that's the first image I want to give you, that we have learned to focus on these decision points in the fire flow. We had to learn this, as I told you, because the answers that came from science were not helping us to bridge the gap with a more traditional understanding of fire in our landscapes. So we have escalated that. So we have built, identified different types of patterns of spread, we have documented about, I don't know, I think it's about 400 fires, and documented the fire regime in different zones. And especially, we have been studying different fires, historical fires, to understand where these strategical management points. And we have been working together with the Forest Service. We have been working together with different agents of the landscape, like hunters or like different agents of landscape, just to focus efforts in these strategical management points that will give us opportunities. And of course, our prescribed burning programs have been focusing more and more in these strategical management points. About how to measure success of this approach, of course, we have different examples. Fires in 1914, we stopped. This was a fire that was, driven from sea breeze from the southeast during the day, and wind driven from the northwest during the night. So we had a strategical management point in this right flank that we have prepared with prescribed burnings, and we have stopped the fire anchored in these opportunities. We have different examples of that, but what I wanted to tell you about is not our prescribed burning program. For us, having this, I think it's about 6 or 7 examples of that. But our prescribed burning program, it's really very small plots. The percentage of burning that we make in the landscape is very small. Even like that, we've managed to have good anchorages in some fires. But what I wanted to explain you is not that, but this other fire, this is Perelló fire, as a matter of fact, near where Ruth lives. And here, there was prescribed burning in this polygon 4. That's it on the south of the fire. The pink is the perimeter. It's in the red zone. So what we could do here, we have in the right flank, after the prescribed burnings, there are a city. In the left flank, we have an area without roads. That meant for us that if the fire went into that zone, we would be, 4 days, 5 days, having our firefighters in this uncomfortable scenario, but also with a lot of resources anchored that we couldn't use for other fires. And if we could prioritize this left flank, which gave us problems of resilience as a fire service, and not prioritize the flank that was going towards the city, it's that we had a lot of prescribed burnings in this area. The fire never arrived to the prescribed burning, never arrived to the city, but having this area of prescribed burning there helped us prioritize the other flank that was going to give us problems on the longer term for us, and that would jeopardize our safety and especially our resilience as a fire service. So that's one of the good things we have had. Also, the focused effort and the focused knowledge on specific points of this landscape. As we are doing prescribed burnings in these zones, think that we are studying these zones, its patterns of wind, the way vegetation changes, the way fuel changes availability, and how this changes fire behavior very specifically in all these zones. So that's important for us. And we can focus this focused learning, and this give us ownership of the strategy we are dealing with. I don't want you to think, and that's why I chose the Perelló example, that we plan operations as lines. But what we learn to do is to watch very carefully fire. Fire, you know, it's said to be a good teacher, but a bad student. And so every fire you face, you make a prediction of how it will behave, and that is your test. And from that prediction, you have a test that you bring to the new fire, and then you make a work. You see if your prediction has worked or not. So this way of understanding fire as a flow, as a teacher, and focusing on the decisions that you make, and understanding every fire as a test, I think it's very important for us. After 20 years of prescribed burning, I still hear in every prescribed burning I go, somebody making hypotheses of why they have seen a change in fire behavior during the prescribed burning, or between yesterday and today, or between the sunny place and the not so sunny place, and make a prediction on how that will change, and then review if this prediction has worked or not. So this is very embedded in our culture. And I think, Ruth, I did well with timing. Thank you. The main ideas I wanted to explain is this idea of understanding fire as a flow, on focusing on decision making, and on focusing efforts on having prescribed burning on this very integrated with planning the strategy, that you will the strategy you will use to change your fires. We cannot change fire regime. We can only change the way the fire burns the landscape. And so that's what we have been doing. I think that's what has been working better for us, and that's our contribution, I think, to this forum. Thank you.
Thank you, Marta, for this very interesting talk. I'm sure that there will be lots of questions. Please write your questions in the Q&A, and later they will answer them. So we now will continue with Tessa Oliver. I will introduce you to her. Tessa is the manager of the Western Cape Umbrella Fire Protection Association, an organization that represents landowners on various platforms, locally and nationally in South Africa. The main focus of her work is around wildfire risk reduction and making sure that landowners understand the law and that fire can be used as a management tool to reduce risk in an ecological sensitive way. Her background in wildfire started when she organized the 2011 Wildfire Conference in Sun City, South Africa, and subsequently implemented the Global Environment Facility Fynbos Fire Project. So Tessa, thank you for being with us today. Good afternoon, and you can go ahead when you want.
Thank you so much, Ruth. Thank you, everybody else. I'm just going to get that. Ruth, if you can just let me know that that is working.
Yeah, it's working.
Okay, great. So I'm going to be speaking about prescribed fire in the Fynbos biome, and that it's not just a fuel reduction tool where we are, but not everybody knows where the Fynbos biome is. So if you have a look at that map of Africa on the top left, you'll see right at the bottom on the southern tip of Africa is the smallest plant biome in the world. It's known as Fynbos, which means fine bush. And fine bush, you can just imagine, has lots of fine fuels. The biome is about the size of Portugal, and it has also got the highest plant species richness in the world. There are more different types of plants that occur on Table Mountain than there are in the entire United Kingdom. There are over 9,000 different species of plants, some of which will occur only on one mountain and nowhere else in the world. So there's a very high endemism where we are. And Fynbos happens to be a fire-adapted ecosystem. We're in a Mediterranean climate. We have winter rains. We have summer drought. And our plants love to burn. It's what they need to have for the seeds to germinate and for the plants to regenerate. But of course, like everything in the world, T's and C's apply. But let me be like a car salesman and say, let's not look at the terms and conditions. Let's just look at how nicely Fynbos burns. So here I have a few pictures. And coincidentally, I can see my house on some of these pictures. They were taken in 2015. This is Cape Town, South Africa. You're looking at Chapman's Peak. This was a fire that was accidentally started. It burned for a week, and it threatened hundreds of thousands of people and their homes. But let's get back to those little terms and conditions. So Fynbos is a little bit like Goldilocks. It doesn't want anything unspecific. Too frequent fires diminishes biodiversity. It also encourages grasses, which create a shorter burn interval and increase the risk of fires recurring. The fire interval in Fynbos is usually between 10 and 15 years, so it's not a high fire frequency. But when Fynbos starts getting older, it becomes quite a big fuel load buildup, which really does increase the risk of bad fires. But if it's burned too frequently, a lot of the keystone species are lost because they're not able to set seed, and grasses start dominating, and then the grasses cause shorter fire return intervals. If fires are too infrequent, plants become moribund or senescent. So they become like an old age home for plants. They don't produce enough seeds. They shade out seedlings, and a lot of the plants need fire in order for the seedlings, for the seeds to germinate. So there's biodiversity loss, and then there's also a huge fuel load buildup, which creates a high fire risk. And like Goldilocks, Fynbos doesn't like it too hot. When the fire is too hot, seed banks die. But when the fire is too cold, there's not enough biomass that's removed, and then the new plants don't have enough space to grow. So when Ruth asked me to give this presentation, one of the things that came up is, are we burning hot enough? And in Fynbos, we've got to be very careful that we're not burning too hot or too cold. It's got to be just right. And also, we can't burn in the wrong season because seedlings don't survive. If we burn in the winter months when it's cooler and it's easier to manage fires, the seedlings germinate, then they have a very pleasant spring, and then they have a hot, dry summer where there are very, very high mortality rates, and that affects the ecology really badly. So let's bring prescribed burning into the mix. What are our objectives in the Fynbos biome? Well, firstly, it's around fuel load reduction, because this is the aim of the talk, but this is also what worldwide we are looking at. We're also trying to maintain ecological processes in the Fynbos biome. We have a very big issue with invasive alien trees, mostly pine species and invasive acacias from Australia that are outcompeting our local species of plant. And so sometimes when there are high invasion rates, the only way to deal with them is to apply fire as a management tool. And also because the invasive alien trees that we have are so incredibly thirsty, they take up a lot more water than our indigenous plants. And so fire is also sometimes used to restore water catchment functions in order to get rid of the aliens in specific areas. So basically, fire is used as an ecosystem-based adaptation to reduce the vulnerability of human communities to the impacts of climate change. In order to deal with climate change, we have to make sure that the environments that we live in are healthy and can resist problem weather and events. At the bottom of the slide, there's a little frog, it's about the size of a grain of rice. It is a little moss frog, and on the right-hand side, there's a fire in its habitat. And this is a burn that we did specifically around one species of tiny, tiny little frog in order to make sure that it has a healthy habitat. So sometimes we do fires that are not necessarily for all of the reasons I gave above, but also for a very special little animal. So another question that was asked is, do we do broad landscape resilience, or do we do local fuel management? So in the fynbos biome, we take the broader landscape into consideration because we've got to look at the ecology and its functioning. And we've got to also look at high-risk areas around the wildland-urban interface. And we've got to look at the different types of land uses that are there. A lot of times there are huge nature reserves in the mountains. There are farmers, there's agriculture, there are people that own big tracts of land that we call holiday farmers. They own it because they enjoy the indigenous vegetation, but they're not utilizing the land in any kind of a commercial way. But also, we look at patches of differing vegetation ages. In other words, we try and create a mosaic of different felt age, so vegetation age, because this decreases the risk of species losses in case there is a large out-of-control wildfire. So if we have a patch that is 10 years old next to a patch that is 5 years old, in the 10-year-old patch of vegetation, a lot of the plants would have produced enough seeds in order for those seeds to spread into the younger patch. And it's easier to manage that and make sure that we don't have biodiversity loss. But of course, we have challenges. Burning next to the wildland-urban interface areas is risky. And in front of you, there's a photograph. The main one, I can see my house. In fact, I'm looking out of that window as I speak. And in the right is a photograph taken from the road that the main photograph was taken from. And that was a fire coming down the mountain. And you can see the size of the people standing on the roof, and you can see the size of the flames of the vegetation above the road. And this is something that is really a big problem. You get a lot of people that decide that they want to live in nature and they're having a great time with all the indigenous trees around them. A lot of the times it's invasive alien trees around them, and they are in incredibly high fire risk areas. As you can see, these are wooden cottages with thatched roofs on, which are just tinderboxes waiting to go up. So doing prescribed burning on the wildland-urban interface is risky if you do it. As you can see from these photographs, there are some rather wealthy people living right next to nature reserves, but also it's risky if you don't do it. On the bottom right is a photograph of Cape Town and the fire that went up Devil's Peak. And so then the question gets asked, would you rather try and burn under more controllable conditions, or would you rather just let the fuel load build up, and then when the weather is absolutely shockingly terrible for firefighting, fire accidentally happens and it goes out of control? I mentioned before that some of the burning is done to remove invasive alien trees. However, even if we want to do ecological burns or fuel reduction burns, the fact that there are invasive trees in our landscape makes it extremely dangerous. So on this photograph here, if you look on the left-hand side, the mountain slope, it looks beautifully, beautifully green and lush. And to most people, that would just be part of nature. But unfortunately, fynbos is the sort of slightly more dappled, shrubby stuff in the front here. And that green is wall-to-wall Pinus radiata. And so then you ask yourself, if a fire comes along, would you rather be fighting a fire on the left, or would you be fighting it on the right in fynbos that is similar age to the pines on the left-hand side? The other thing that we struggle with is the availability of burning days that we have in a year. In other words, when the FDI is right, that we can do a burn, and remember, fynbos is Goldilocks, doesn't want it too hot, doesn't want it too cold, doesn't want it in the wrong time of year. So naturally, fires would have occurred between around November till about March, April, which are our early summer and late summer months. And this would be when there would be accidental lightning, there would be lightning strikes, maybe rock falls, things like that that would start fires, and the FDI would be conducive to the fire spreading more than if it had started in winter. And unfortunately, with the predicted climate change scenarios that we've been given for the fynbos biome, is that the FDI days are going to become more and more extreme in the next 40 years. And this means that in order to be able to do a safe prescribed burn, taking into account Goldilocks and all her needs, is that the FDI days are going to get much, much more, and the days that we're able to burn safely are going to become a lot less. And this is a real problem. Another issue that we deal with is liability. If you look at this little screenshot on the bottom left from the Martin County Fire and Rescue, I took that this morning. It's from April 2nd, 2024. What happened is that a controlled burn in Florida went out of control and caused quite a bit of damage and made news that even made it to South Africa. But the question is always to be asked, what happens when things go out of control? Who is to blame and who pays? And the two headlines on the right-hand side, not from South Africa, but from the US, show that there's a lot of pressure on somebody who's going to be signing off on a burning permit to do a prescribed burn for whatever reason. And if something goes wrong, who is going to pay and who is going to go to jail? And this is the reality that I think people face right across the world, not just here. Another thing that we have to deal with is the public perception around prescribed burning specifically. And the media doesn't always help. Wildfires are given names like raging, destructive, devastating, it's hell. There are images posted online, on social media, in newspapers of burnt animals. And fire is seen as something that's bad and damaging and not actually part of the cycle of life. And that is unfortunate when you're in a fire-adapted ecosystem, because you cannot exclude fire indefinitely from the landscape. It has to be part of managing the landscape. However, we have to burn. And fortunately, within the area in which I work, there is a much greater understanding about the necessity of prescribed burns by relevant bodies. That includes the fire services, conservation bodies, traffic department, and local politicians. And people are starting to work together, and prescribed burns are becoming multi-organizational events where multiple stakeholders are getting together and they plan and they make these burns together. These burns are also used for capacity development and training, where people can learn how to do the incident command system, or they can get on fire training in a safer environment than in an uncontrolled wildfire. And so we're trying to find the positives in doing prescribed burning other than just around fuel reduction. One of the examples which we have, and I think it's necessary that if really well done prescribed burns have been implemented, that these should be publicized so that the public and politicians and decision makers can understand the necessity of these types of burns. And this is a burn that we did in Betty's Bay, which is about 100 kilometers from where I live. The area in red was part of a nature reserve, and the vegetation was over 20 years old. It needed to burn. It had an incredible fuel load. It's in a high-risk area. There's been quite a few fires that have been started there either accidentally or on purpose. And so after a lot of public participation and a lot of digging of heels of the public, we managed to implement this burn. in March last year. Fortunately so, this is just the corner area of the burn. So you can see there are a lot of houses, retired people, holiday homes on the side of this burn. It was fantastic weather. It was an extremely successful burn. Monitoring was done before and after the burn to find which plant species were there before the burn, to see what came up afterwards. Animal rescues were done by the Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. And it was a all-round successful burn. And then a year later, this happened, just a few kilometers from the area that I showed you before. And it threatened this entire town of Pringle Bay. And most of the town was evacuated. You can see on the bottom right was where I'd had the image. I'm just going to scroll up, of the beach and the houses. And if you look at the top left, there's Pringle Bay. And so if you look at that satellite image on the bottom right, you can see Pringle Bay and the smoke, and that burned all the way to Pringle Bay. Everybody was forcibly evacuated, and then the wind turned and blew it straight back onto Betty's Bay, and the fire was not able to go any further than that area that we had done in the prescribed burn, which only had vegetation that was a year old, and there was not enough fuel load to carry it on. And I think it's important that these things get publicized and that people understand that prescribed burns are a necessary management tool. Thank you very much. I think Ruta did pretty well on time.
Yeah, thank you, Tessa. You were very good on time, and I really like your talk. We'll go for the questions after. So now I would like you to introduce Stephen Fillmore. We go to California now. Good morning, Stephen. Stephen currently works for the U.S. Forest Service, where he serves as the Regional 5 Fuel Operations Specialist. His portfolio focused on working with national forests and their partners to increase the amount and quality of wildfire fuels mitigation work accomplished with California and the Pacific Islands. He actively works in wildfire management as a complex incident commander and operations section chief, and has helped to accomplish complex prescribed fires throughout California. He recently finished his PhD from the University of Idaho, where his dissertation focused on wildfire decision-making with the context of wildfires managed for an objective other than fuel suppression. So, Stephen, you can go ahead.
All right, thank you for that. Thank you for that introduction here. Let me try to get my presentation going here. And all right, let me know.
Perfect.
All right, thanks, Ruth. Appreciate that. Thanks everybody for coming. Always tough to follow what Marta and Tessa was saying. There's probably going to touch on a couple of the same issues there, but wonderful presentation so far. So thank you for the opportunity to talk here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about prescribed fire in California. I have California Plus here because it's hard to talk about prescribed fire in just California when there's a lot of it that's going on throughout the United States just as a whole. So my thoughts are from my perspective, one practitioner. And I think the things that I want to talk about the most today in the short time that I have to talk with you is a bit about the scale and the complexity of the prescribed fire that we're trying to apply here in the States. So I'll start with this slide. If we were all together in a room, which obviously would be better, but I would ask you to look at these slides and see where do you think in the states that these were from. So on the top left, we have a picture that was a lot like Tessa just showed. Some prescribed fire by community. On the top right, you have a big machine pile in some mixed conifer. Bottom right, some long needle pine. In the middle, chaparral fuel break being burned. In the bottom left, there's oak understory burning. And I would ask you where this was from. I would expect that some of you would speculate different parts of the country. And the reality is actually every single one of these pictures was taken on a burn in one county, in San Diego County here, where I've spent the majority of my career, not all of it, but I've spent most of it here in San Diego County. So that's just 5 different types of burning that takes place in one small corner of one state of the country, which just shows I think what I want to demonstrate with this slideshow a little bit, which is there's a lot of complexity with what we're trying to do here, and you got to be good at a lot of different types of prescribed fire to do it well, which is asking a lot of our practitioners and a lot of different reasons for burning too. So I didn't want to assume that everyone knew the kind of burning that we do here in the States, so I thought I'd do just a bit of a tour, and before I get on to some of the other issues that we talk about here, or that we deal with. Oh, I forgot to start my timer. Rudy, you have to keep me honest here. I'll add a minute or so. Sorry about that. All right, so pile burning. This is the first one. It's a big place, but we do a lot of pile burning. Pile burning is where we go in and thin the vegetation ahead of a burn. It allows for a lot more controllable fire, especially when it's done in advance of a broadcast burn later. So a lot of times we'll go in, thin the forest or thin a stand, pile it, burn it, wait a couple years, and then follow that up with a broadcast burn. And that's a pretty good reset for a lot of our systems. Gets us to where we need to be, where ostensibly then it could be maintained by wildfire in the future or further prescribed burns like broadcast burns. We broadcast burn, which is just, pick a polygon, light it on fire. We do it for a lot of different reasons, you name it. This is actually a burn that we did in South Idaho where we are cutting juniper in favor of sagebrush. Sagebrush is imperiled in a lot of our Great Basin ecosystems, so we were just trying to get rid of it. And so this burn is just trying to get rid of that juniper. There's also something that's gaining a lot more attention lately, which is great, which is the cultural uses of fire, traditional ecological knowledge, or fire that's really rooted in Native American use of fire. This is a burn here from the Cleveland, just south of Los Angeles, southeast of Los Angeles, where we were burning small plots of junco grass. And junco grass is used for basket weaving. So we did this in collaboration with the California Indian Basket Weaver Association. And little tweak on this one, couldn't really use drip torches and gasoline because they when they weave the baskets, they put that the junco grass into their mouths. So we wouldn't want to have diesel and gas on that. So a lot more attention being paid to things like that. And then there's just simple fuels reduction. This reminded me a lot of a picture Tessa's had of burning right next to homes. We do it a lot in Southern California, where a lot of my career has been, because we're trying to protect those urban community defense zones. We're putting in fuel breaks. And so we've actually gotten quite used to burning next to these $1 million houses, which unfortunately $1 million house isn't saying a whole lot in Southern California anymore, to be honest. We also do a lot of habitat improvement burning, which I particularly enjoy. This is another burn we did in Idaho. This is aspen, tremuloides, that we were trying to regenerate. It has a history of fire exclusion, so conifers are encroaching into aspen, and so we cut all the conifer down, burned it, and then we're doing that in favor of the aspen. And then, of course, we have a lot of large wildfires or post-logging, so we do a lot of these large machine pile burns. You can see there's a person on the bottom right of that photograph, so you can see that this pile is probably 30 feet tall by 30 feet wide. And it's just trying to get rid of that vegetation, or just trying to get rid of that dead fuel, actually. All right, so that's just a quick tour of a lot of things that we do in California and the States. But the question is, does it work? And I think you might know my answer is, yeah, I think it works. It works a lot of the time. Not all the time, but a lot of the time. It does two things I think prescribed fire does. And fuels management just as a whole. And I should have noted, I've spent my whole career in hazardous fuels management, a little over 20 years now. So we've been seeing burns for a long time now. It gives us the chance during wildfire incidents, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Those chances are especially had when it's aligned with other pre-planning activities. And what I mean by that is, if you're working with a local fire safe council, you're working with a community group that has done work to harden their community, work where you don't have just an independent fuel break that just stops at a property boundary, but where that continues onto another property, and that work is done collaboratively. That's where we really get the most bang for our buck for these fuels and prescribed fire projects, especially in the urban interface. And we can't forget the fact that we try to give nature a chance during wildfires. We try to get fire out just on a landscape scale basis. It's very difficult for us to do. So again, I'll talk about it a little bit later, but we're also trying to not only manage the ecology, but also values protection. And those are the two main thrusts of fuels management that we focus on. So we have some examples of success. There's examples actually all over the place and going back years. There's a couple that I'll talk about. I've got a slide next for There's a great example that came out of the Smokehouse Creek fire in North Texas, which just was a couple months ago. We saw a project here on the Cleveland National Forest in south central San Diego County, which is this community of Carvacre, which is just a community of maybe 150 homes that's completely surrounded by national forest. In this case, it's Chaparral National Forest. And we had been doing a community protection project around that for many years, burning it. And in 2020, we had a fire that actually started inside of it, burned outside, and then we were able to protect it when the fire impinged back along and burned all the way around it. So, and there's a lot of case examples. So I think it's pretty well established in the literature and case studies that, yeah, prescribed fire works for what we're trying to do. But of course, we always need to remember that nothing in fire works all of the time. I think it's the way I've come to think about prescribed fire and fuels management is just, it gives us a chance that we didn't have before. This is a photograph of that fire in Texas I was talking about, where they actually did, I think it's a 7-mile long burn along the community perimeter. And when the Smokehouse Creek fire, which is on the right, you can actually you can't see the perimeter of the burn itself, because it's that section of greenish brown, you have to forgive me, I'm colorblind, between the community and the burn, but it stopped it flat and protected the community for the most part. And that's a recent success and was well hailed. And here's a picture of, we can't forget we're trying to do things ecologically out there. So this is post that aspen burn photo I showed a little bit. We got 1,500 to 3,000 stems an acre initially. Of course, you want less than that later, but tremendous regrowth of aspen worked really, really well. So those are both successes in my mind for prescribed fire. So are we doing enough prescribed fire? Probably guess my answer, which is probably not. Crystal Colden from University of Merced now has a paper that I love. I just love the titles that are perfectly descriptive, which is, we're not doing enough prescribed fire in the Western United States to mitigate wildfire risk. It's a great paper. You can check it out. It says it much better than I'll be able to say here. But no, we're clearly not doing enough prescribed fire. To put some numbers to it here, just focusing on California, you'll find different numbers in the literature, but in general, it's said that just baseline fire ecology in California, pre-colonial, 4 million acres need to burn in California. But our average these days, the last 20 years, is 1.2 million acres. So we're talking 3-some million acres a year deficit every year. And what we're doing intentionally with prescribed fire is on the order of 65, 75,000 acres a year, perhaps. And that's Forest Service and our partners. I'm thinking with the increase that we've been doing lately, we might be able to scratch at 100,000 acres a year. But we have a goal that we're operating under now, is to get 500,000 acres of prescribed fire a year. That's, a 5-fold increase. It's going to be really, really tough to do. I hate to be cynical. I think it's a little oversold. But then, when you have conversations with people, they say, well, it's a stretch goal. Apparently a stretch goal is the thing where you don't really think you can do it, or you really would nice if you did. But it's just trying to stretch you to get more done than you normally have. So I don't know. We'll see. We're going to keep trying. It's certainly what we're doing. So where's the most success in burning? What I think is, like, if we're only going to do 65, 70,000 acres prescribed fire, let's do those in the most important places. Let's prioritize. Let's put that in the wildland urban interface, in the WUI. Let's find those critical watersheds, which, especially in a drought prone state like California and other Western states, we need to protect those critical watersheds that are providing drinking water and areas of cultural importance. I think if we can get those covered, and then we can move out onto the landscape. But until then, that's where we should start. And we have had a lot of success in those areas, and we should continue. But we know that prescribed fire alone, of course, is not enough, especially in forested systems. I was listening to a webinar Eric Knapp and Mark Meyer put on, I think it was last week. Yeah, it was recently. And they were talking about the Caldor fire, which is a large fire on the El Dorado and some other forests in California. And they just hammered home the point, which we've heard before, which is that you can't just do prescribed fire. You have to back that up beforehand with mechanical work to reduce those fuels so that you can get that. So when you do put that prescribed fire in place, the fire that you're going to get during a wildfire is much less severe, and you can promote those resilient forests. So during wildfire events, it was a great webinar, and it just really reinforced that point. I thought it was great. So, all right, so more prescribed fire. We know we need more prescribed fire. Most of us agree. Fire is still the answer. And again, we know the fuels are not necessarily ready. And that's one of sort of the secrets with this. You can't just go and put prescribed fire into every stand that we want to. Sometimes you need to do a lot of that prep work, a lot of that fuels management work beforehand. But I do think we need to start maybe changing some of the ways that we look at how we go about management. And I mean year round too, not just during the prescribed fire season. What I personally would like to see as a manager is I really want to move the base of knowledge that we learn in prescribed fire over into the wildfire season a bit more, because those skills are completely transferable. Everything that you learn in prescribed fire is a skill that's used in wildfire. And just to speak to one aspect of technology, unpiloted aerial systems or unmanned aerial systems, whatever you want to call them, drones, especially drones that are able to perform aerial ignition, has absolutely changed in the face of wildfire. And we're seeing a lot of wildfires where we're able to both meet control objectives using indirect strategies at the same time that we're burning down to those lines and putting in what otherwise looks like a fantastic prescribed burn. And some of the folks that are operating drones right now for the Forest Service and other agencies are becoming some of the best, most skilled, thoughtful burners that I've seen. So I think that we are getting to a point where there's a lot of transference of those skills and that knowledge about how to put fire on the ground and how to get to an outcome that is what we're trying to see, both ecologically and also from protection objectives. So, and I always need to make a plug, we're chasing wildfire already. I still like the term prescribed natural fire, which is an old term before, I think it was even pre-1995 policy. But I still like I like it in the notion that it still remembers that a wildfire is a fire is a fire, and every one of those fires has the opportunity to do good. So, all right, last slide. Hopefully I'm still doing all right on time. Is to talk about how tough it is. Remember, I talked about the complexities, one of the things I wanted to talk here. So there's a lot of realities of burning or being a burn boss. In the States, the burn boss is the person who is in charge of a burn, an individual incident. So we have a lot more policy. After our escape, the Hermit's Peak Calf Canyon fire in New Mexico, especially, the Forest Service had what we call a National Prescribed Fire Program review. So that added more guidance, more policy, and some would say more disincentive to becoming a burn boss. Because at this point, it is a completely voluntary thing if you want to be a burn boss. You don't have to do it. It doesn't affect your career. Many people will go a whole 30-year career and not become a burn boss with no negative effects. So, and then, of course, the restrictions that we have, whether it be the burn windows that other speakers have talked about, or just many concerns. There's a lot of disincentives, and air quality is real. I want to make a plug-in for smoke. For a lot of years, we kind of ignored the fact that when we burn, we produce smoke. But if you start looking at the research that comes out lately, and the public is becoming more sensitive to air quality, you can't ignore it anymore. It's very, very real. There's a lot of smoke-induced morbidity in the general population, and we know it's bad for the firefighters as well too. So it's something that needs to continue to be considered. And just putting on my social science hat a little bit, everyone has agency, everyone has an opinion, and people's concerns are valid. So if the public is concerned about a burn, we need to remember that it's a valid point. And if we can pay attention to the concerns, we can see what those, find the valid ones. There's a vocal minority, which is not in line with what most of society wants out of active management. But yet we can find, what those rational fears are, what those justified concerns are, and places to build trust. And internally, it doesn't help that some of our people are getting arrested for doing their jobs. You might have heard that we had a burn boss get arrested in Oregon some time ago. That's still going through the courts, and that's given people who are already having disincentive to become a burn boss a bit of pause. And so yeah, that was a precedent that had never really happened before, and we're still seeing how that's going to play out. So that certainly doesn't help. And of course, there's public lack of trust. Who can blame them? Things do happen. Mistakes do occur, and we can't deny that. But at the same time, we need to remember statistically, this is a 0.16 problem in the state. So it's something I brought up to some of my colleagues, which is we actually have a higher success rate in prescribed fire, and success rate defined as not escaping, than we do in initial attacking wildfires. Wildfire initial attack rate's about 98%. We're about 99.84% successful in prescribed fire. So it's a lot of work to try to correct the 0.16 problem. Sometimes you just need to acknowledge that wildfire is a stochastic thing. Prescribed fire is too. So, and then of course, there's a lot of opportunity to build individual trust. Most people trust individuals. They don't trust organizations. As those individuals do a better job and continue to communicate with folks, that organizational trust will build. So All right, and that's it. I'll be around. Look forward to any questions, and thanks. Appreciate the opportunity to talk.
Thank you, Stephen, for this presentation. Thank you all of you for being on time. It's not easy to speak about your countries and about your job just in 15 minutes. So thank you again. And now we will move on to the questions. We already have some.
Yes, we do. And I want to kick us off with a question for everyone, although Stephen just started touching on this at the very end of his presentation. The question is, we are introducing fire to recover the fire regime and ecosystem functions, which means we're using an artificial tool to recover a natural fire regime. But we are using this tool with a lot of caution, and sometimes we don't achieve the objectives, and we're really not using it as it would be naturally. So do you have any ideas on how we can better communicate the use of fire to society? And
Should everybody just jump in?
I was going to say, I don't want to put anyone on the spot. So if you want to jump in, that would be great.
I'll jump in.
Sure.
So, sorry, it's quite dark where I'm at. It's an interesting question because what is considered natural anymore? Is it considered before humans started intervening, before colonialization, before modernizers ago? Is it 400 years ago? Is it 1,000 years ago? Was it 10,000 years ago? What would be considered natural? And climate change also then plays a role in what you would consider natural. And so if you understand how certain species within a fire-adapted ecosystem work and what potentially their fire intervals should be for maximal seed set or seed set that is enough in order for the species to proliferate after fires, and what kind of seasons and what temperatures of heat, then it is a lot easier to plan prescribed burns that are ecologically sound. That said, there are a lot of us that are into taking the ecology into account, but humans take human safety and livelihoods more into account than they would potentially a species of plant or a species of frog or a species of tortoise. And so it's incredibly hard to try and sway the public in multiple directions when wildfires basically just give the fear of loss of life and livelihoods.
I can jump in. This question has like two parts. First part is how unadapted are our prescribed burnings to the fire regime, and the consequences on the fire ecology. And this first part, I think it's an important one, and surprisingly, some of the main concerns there, it's, as a matter of fact, biodiversity issues. For us, the best season to burn is during season or during summer or late summer. It's best, as Tessa was saying, it's not about an ideal fire regime. It's not about an historical fire regime. It just changes, for example, just as one example, the percentage of grass versus the percentage of shrubs that grows after the fire. But burning in this season means smoke for more days. Burning in this season means having firefighters anchored in longer control timings, and it also has some problems with biodiversity that tell responsibles that questions how much can we burn because of very specific plants or very specific insects or specific animals in the community. And well, this is a complex issue in one part. And what we have found is that most of the burning that we actually do in the burning is done during wildfires. And we have to be very aware of that. We are not longer just attacking fire. We are managing it, we are containing it. And that means we are putting values outside of surface into decision making on attacking a right flank or a left flank, into how much containment fire operations do we do. And that is and this is where we need to put decision making concerning fire ecology, because prescribed burnings, we do very small plots, but when we use fire and manage fire, real fires, there's a lot of decision making that is done. And that is affecting, if you look at our landscapes, you see how have our decisions have affected the landscape, and how the options we had would have made very different answers. The second part is about how do we communicate, and for that I would think about transparency. We cannot say we do what we want, because we cannot. We cannot say we do what we can. But we have to be very transparent with the public and explain them that what we are doing, that would happen, and that are the good and the bad consequences on what we are doing. So I think it's two part, and that's it.
Yeah, I don't know that I would add a whole lot to that. Those are great answers. Pretty similar to where we're at, and we can speak to it if you want, but
we can move on. We have a few more questions. So next question: in California, insurance companies are ceasing to renew policies for homeowners living in wildfire-prone areas. Is this insurance retreat phenomenon happening in your country as well? And so I think this question was directed at Tessa, but I also wanted to invite Marta and Stephen to comment on how insurance is influencing home building as well as fire management.
Right. So in South Africa, fire losses and damages are actually very, very slight compared to crime and other losses such as drought and flooding. And so it constitutes less than 5% of the payouts that insurance companies have to make. And so it's not yet become an issue, but it is becoming an issue. In 2017, we had the biggest fire in the history of South Africa in terms of losses, with over 1,000 houses and structures burning down, and it running into hundreds of millions of rands, which is probably only about $25, but joking. But no, they are actually not stopping insurance, although they're starting to look at it now.
Yeah, likewise in Catalonia, the damages in wild and urban interface is very different than in California and in USA. I think that two summers ago, we had one of the fires that has been more damaging to houses, and about 50 houses were affected. And affected doesn't mean burned. We build with bricks, and that has a very different, and the wildland fire urban interface, it's affected very differently. So that means that insurance companies just spreads the risk among everybody else, and that's it for them, not a problem.
and Stephen, I guess the question kind of already addressed the situation in California. So maybe I'll just direct the next question at you. So different topic. When you do large pile burns, are you giving consideration for site soil degradation and invasive management post-burn? So wondering if the post-treatment picture is being considered, or if the only focus is fuel reduction.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and happy to answer that. I've asked this question a lot over the course of my career, and I've had some of my best friends are actually soil scientists, so we've had a lot of conversations over beverages about what the impacts are. And I've seen a lot of the the long-term effects of these. What I've been, and I'm not an expert on this in terms of this, I'm not gonna pretend I'm a soil scientist, but what I've been told is that most of the heat flux actually, when you burn those large piles, most of it's actually going up in the air. It's not until you get down to the lower portions of those where you start get that heat residence that goes into the soil. And yeah, it is a concern. The first part of the question, do we consider it? Absolutely, we consider it. Everything we do, of course, goes through environmental analyses where that is considered. What's the impact of it going to be on that just small, semi-small portion of the landscape versus that same fuel load spread out all over. I know that there's some disagreements in the literature about that. I will just skip to the punchline and skip to what I've actually seen. I've seen those areas where you had large piles. It definitely affects regrowth. It takes some time, and you're depending on the moisture in the soil where you're burning. That affects things a lot too. And I guess when it's wet, it can even steam and kill seeds. And again, there's a lot of complexities associated with it. I've seen those areas not really come up with invasives a lot of times, unless there was invasives in the area, because what you got to remember is actually most of the time not a lot grows back there initially, and it gets kind of recolonized over time. So it's not complete sacrifice. But yeah, I'm always a little bit uncomfortable with it, to be perfectly honest with you. I have one anecdote. The smaller burn piles, the more like 6 foot by 6 foot piles. I had a soil scientist I worked with one time who was so concerned about the topsoil that they actually wanted us to dig the topsoil out, move it, place it next to the pile, and then put the pile in there, and then put the topsoil back afterwards. And I felt that would be a little bit probably more damaging than the fire. So anyway, all of which is to say it's certainly something that's considered. And but on the whole, I haven't seen too many long-term effects. So yeah, that's about the best answer I can give from a non-soil scientist.
Fair enough. And Tessa and Marta, I wanted to give you a chance. Does post-prescribed burn management factor into your planning at all? How is this done? If at all.
Yes, it's definitely factored in. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So there's definitely post-burn different aspects looked at when a prescribed burn is done, because we're the Mediterranean ecosystem and our invasives are also fire prone and love to be stimulated by fire. There will be a lot of pine trees and a lot of Australian acacias that come up after fires. So there has to always be a post-fire treatment, usually by hand pulling out seedlings. Sometimes some kind of a herbicide is applied. Soil erosion is usually not a massive issue unless the fire has been too hot. In other words, if there have been too many invasives in the fynbos that have created a too hot fire, which has damaged soil structures, then it can cause some erosion. But because fynbos is naturally adapted to burning periodically, it's not a massive issue that erosion is a problem.
Our soil effect studies have shown quite little effect of our prescribed burnings on soils. And on pile burning, it gave us more diversity than another thing, and just very specific prescribed burnings in very specific conditions. We have had some impact, significant impact. on the soil. That's and on the short term. So what we have been doing is looking at the larger effect ones. And the other thing that we have been looking more than invasives is what type of structure do we want to leave. So depending on the distance between two burns, the species that are able to recolonize the area, and depending on the fire season you burn, the species that you have are different, and so the structure that you have is different. And as I told you, we do very small prescribed burnings in very specific places. So I think it's more about what type of structure do we need and want to have in these very specific places. That's
All right, thank you so much. I want to go to another question for everyone. So this question is about the workforce. So Dr. Fillmore mentioned the difficulty in finding burn bosses in the United States, but how are workforce trends generally and in other countries? Have workforce trends improved, or is there still a need to grow a lot more? And Marta, maybe we can start with you.
About our main limitation is that actually the prescribed burning program is held mainly by public administration, and that has its limitations more than in burn buses. We compete in resources with the rest of activities, both human and also material resources like trucks or control people or ignition people. We compete with the rest of activities of a fire and rescue service, with all that implies. And I think prescribed burning should be, if it's done with ecological purposes, it should be done at a larger scales, by held by not only natural parks, or not only, but also by private interest and private companies. So I think this is our path there.
I'm just going to hop in. So as Marta mentioned, resources are actually one of the biggest reasons that we're not doing as much prescribed burning as we could or would want to. It's extremely costly. We're a resource poor country compared to Europe and North American countries. And so there's usually more funding made available for disaster relief than there is for prevention. And I think that is actually an international problem, that when a disaster hits, resources are unlocked, but the prevention thereof, the funding is not as readily available. With regards to the people that we have on the ground, we have some exceptional people, but like Marta mentioned before, there's a lot of knowledge that is not necessarily within the fire services, but is sometimes with the landowners. And a lot of landowners are getting older, and the younger generations are not learning from the land anymore, or from the elders. And that's why I said that we're trying as much as possible to do capacity development and training while we're doing prescribed burning, in order to build up the capacity and knowledge. There definitely aren't, there's not a lack of people feeling like they would want to do prescribed burns. I think it's the issues are more around funding and permission.
Thanks, Tessa. Stephen, anything to add?
No, I touched on it a little bit, but yeah, we are certainly, at least in the federal wildland fire system, experiencing a lot of trouble. Recruiting and retaining people, mostly due to economic. It's almost all economically based, I should say, and specifically just the pay disparities that exist between the federal system right now and state and local systems is making it tough to retain people. But yeah, and there's some good research on that. Aaron Bevel just came out with a good paper recently, and yeah, it's starting to get the attention it deserves. So it really is too bad we're losing a lot of really high quality, high year people, and so yeah, it does happen. You get turnover like that, but yeah, I'll just leave it at that. Probably for the best.
All right, thank you. Well, as always, there's a lot more to talk about than we have time for. So I do want to be mindful of our schedules. So I'm going to turn things over to Root again to close us out.
Thank you, Tara. Thank you all. I am going to share just this last slide. Yeah, it has been a very interesting session. Thank you, all of you. Thank you, all of you, for joining us. We are looking forward to seeing you again on the 23rd of April when we will discuss the traditional use of fire. There were a couple of questions today about that. We will focus our next session about the traditional use of fire. So with that, we will sign off for today. Thank you to everybody. Thank you for all speakers, and see you next session on the 23rd of April.